Okay, my dear guests, I think we are ready to start. And I really hope that you were able to visit some main stage sessions already today, but yesterday, after all the opening remarks and the activities of day one, you really feel like you are inspired, and today we will continue inspiring you. So, and in our room today, we've got the first session, which is a really amazing panel that will explore how funders can move beyond the surface level metrics into really measuring real impact and the outcomes of play from simple behavior change into really long lasting impact. And I'm really honored to welcome our wonderful panelists today, and I would welcome on stage our moderator, Risa Ward. She is the Senior Vice President of Operations in Crisis Text Line. Risa, please welcome. Next one, we're joined by Meghan Gardner, Transformative Design Director in Cultura Connect. Elizabeth Newbury, Gaming Expert Consultant, Senior Director, Center for Technology, Innovation and Space from Meridian International Center. And also with us today is Tracy Costigan, Vice President of Impact Evolution and Storytelling, Crisis Text Line. Okay, over to you, Risa.
Thanks so much, Tatiana. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's really great to have you in the room. We have a fantastic panel here today with really diverse experience on the topic of how do we measure change. I think very often we measure what's easiest to measure or what we know is within our control, what we know we can deliver on, when what we're really after is that lasting and transformational change. So measuring what really matters is how we know what's working, but even more than that, when we measure what really matters, it helps us create greater change. And that's what we're gonna learn about from this panel here today. So I'm gonna start off with each of us introducing ourselves briefly, and I'll ask everyone in the context of your intro, share a little teaser about an outcome from your work lately that you are excited about and that the audience may hear more about later in the panel. I'll kick us off. I'm here representing Crisis Text Line. As you heard, we are a free 24/7 service where anyone here in the US and in other parts of the world can reach out in a time of need by text message and connect with a trained, empathetic person to talk to them in that moment where they need someone to talk to. And my role, one of the things I oversee is our volunteer program, where we have trained and connected 15,000 people each year to do this work, this life-saving work of talking to people when they need someone to talk to. So one outcome that's really exciting for me, beyond the impact that these volunteers have doing their volunteer work, we have learned from our volunteers that participating in this work and that the training we provide, half of them say it has inspired them to make a career change, and half also say that it has helped them get a job or get into a school program that advances their career. And that's an outcome we're really excited about. So I will pass down the line, starting with Meghan.
Thank you. I would also add that I've seen some of the statistics that Crisis Text Line gathers, and it is jaw-dropping. So if you have a moment to go over to their website and take a look at their data, it's amazing. So I'm Meghan Gardner. I have a master's degree in transformative game design. Yes, they do have a master's degree in that through Uppsala University. I also believe there's one at CMU. And what is transformative game design? It is creating games that result in a prolonged and sustained change of behavior in the participant. Therefore, I prefer to say measurable change of behavior. And a project that I'm very excited that we're working on right now is called GRIT, Games for Resilience and Interactive Transformation. These are therapeutic live-action role-playing games, specifically for serving children and adults in post-crisis areas. We're in discussions with the Gates Foundation about funding a pilot program in Ukraine for children coming off of the area of the front. And basically, I'll go into a little more later on, but there's a lot of research behind how role-playing games can help kids process trauma through what's called the alibi of the character. And I'll touch on that a little more. But it's basically making sure that it's not just creating a game where kids are playing, although there's a lot of value in that, because play is the antidote to depression. I would also add, though, that having that measurable outcome is what funders are looking for.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Costigan, Vice President of Impact Evaluation and Storytelling at Crisis Text Line. I am trained as a clinical psychologist and actually started my career studying the role of games in improving mental health and well-being for children and their families and communities. I've spent most of my career, after some time of clinical work, I've spent most of my career doing research, evaluation, strategy, and learning in the nonprofit health and well-being sector. And prior to coming to Crisis Text Line a year and a half ago, I spent a decade as a funder for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the largest public health foundation in the U.S. So I am here on this panel to talk about impact evaluation and also represent a bit of the funder perspective as well. In terms of an outcome I'm excited about, so Crisis Text Line has been around since 2014. And historically, Crisis Text Line really thought about itself as a crisis response intervention. Texters reach out, as Risa described, in their moment of need or in their moment of crisis, and they're looking for support. And texters get that. We support about 1.5 million conversations per year in the US, over 15 million conversations since the beginning globally. And that number of conversations is a really important output, right? That is incredible scale. And the outcome that we see at the individual texter level is reductions in distress and bringing people from a hot place of crisis to a cool calm. That's exciting. However, when I came into the organization and we started really working with leadership to articulate what really is this model, there was something else emerging, which now we have written down in our strategic framework, which has to do with the impact for volunteers and their community. So in addition to what Risa described, volunteers report to us in our most recent impact study that they are learning new skills, that they are applying to their own personal resilience, their own well-being, and for every conversation that they have on the platform, they are on average turning around and supporting somebody in their community. And so we really see this ripple effect. So there's sort of this other individual and community level outcome, and then the last outcome that I'm super excited about, and I'll get into this more later, is systems level, that through our technology platform, our research, our curriculum and training, we are becoming and serving as a systems influencer in the digital mental health space. We are in a lot of conversations about the power of human connection at scale, the importance of human connection in digital mental health, and how to connect the dots between digital mental health, sort of the advances in AI, and keeping humans in the loop, because that really is what's going to get to our vision of creating a more empathetic world.
Great. I'll keep this short so we can get to the questions and the meat of it. But I'm Liz Newbury. I was the senior director, or I am currently the senior director at Meridian International Center, which is a do tank in DC. Prior to that, I worked in the federal government space at the Wilson Center. I was the director of the Serious Games Initiative for 8 years, which was a 20-year-old initiative that focused on how do we use games, especially for public policy education and public policy engagement, and also as a convening body to amplify conversations happening at places like this for public policy folks to understand the power of games and the power of good. We were doged, so now I'm at Meridian doing the same thing, but more or less one of the lenses that I'm hoping to contribute to this conversation is the government lens. I'm the policy wonk on the table, but also some of the academic research that's happening and how do we move beyond motivating people to learn and actually having impacts on learning and engagement. So some of the projects I've worked on include such exciting topics as the federal budget through games. You might have played The Fiscal Ship, and that was played by 4 million people worldwide. As a historical lens, that's a really great statistic that 4 million people have played the game, but then there's the question of, so what? So what did they learn? What is the impact of it? I've reviewed for everything from festivals like this and South by Southwest EDU in the impact space, as well as reviewed on government grants. I've been the recipient of a government grant. And how do we really leverage that conversation and leverage the metrics that we can get now to really measure attitudinal change, behavioral change, and knowledge retention in games?
All right, so a lot to get into. Before we dive into the meat, since we are talking about collaborative work, how can different people working on a project come together to define impact? I want to get a sense of who is here. If you'll indulge me just raising your hand, who here is a game designer, creator, developer? All right, a lot. What about working on tech platforms, hardware in the gaming industry? You, awesome, okay. Civil society, NGOs, fellow nonprofits like Tracy and me. All right, excellent. And then what about research, education, government, Liz's people? Okay.
Hello, my people.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, and then finally, anyone in media, entertainment space? Okay, so we really have everyone here, which is so exciting, and I think this conversation hopefully can give us all some shared language to talk about designing these projects together. So I will start it off with a question for Meghan as we talk about how can designers and funders work together to have a transformative impact. So Meghan, can you share an example where a clear outcome measurement plan accelerated the impact of a project that you worked on?
Yeah, certainly. I think the key reason why we are now at the second round with the Gates Foundation is because we specifically are asking for funding to measure efficacy of therapeutic live-action role-playing games versus traditional group therapy, which, by the way, this is the first time that will have ever been done, I believe, of a role-playing game versus traditional therapy. And they're excited about that because if we come out showing even a 50% efficacy, that's significant because we're 1/20th the cost. And our programs are being run by trauma-informed facilitators with 2 weeks of training, not actual therapists. So we have a highly scalable model, very affordable model, extremely localized, and analog. All the sweet spots that the Gates Foundation is looking for. So for rather short money, they see that the potential upside of this is very high. Because if we do succeed in having good measurable outcomes, which will be determined by a third party, not by us, but by an independent third party, then we have a really solid solution for the space between self-help and group therapy, of which there is very little. I mean, there's a lot of your urgent care that's happening with Crisis Text Line, but there's no treatment for ongoing situations, and to be able to manage in a safe space your traumatic response to what's happened to you, especially in a fun game, where at no moment do you have to talk about your feelings, instead you're talking about your character's feelings.
Wonderful. So Tracy, Tatiana kicked us off by mentioning this difference between the surface level and the deeper measurement. Can you help us unpack what does it really mean to measure the impact or the outcomes, and how is that different from measuring outputs or those more surface measures? How should funders think about the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple of things I want to cover, but for those of us doing mission-driven work, interested in social impact, right, including funders, we're really interested in impact, in the difference we can make in the world, in transformative change, as the title of our session is. But what ends up happening is, as a funder, we often just ultimately ask for outputs, and as a grantee or somebody who's being funded, we're often just putting out outputs. So what's the difference? Just to clarify some terms here, outputs versus outcomes. So outputs is production. It's the stuff you make, the stuff you do, right? It's the number of games, it's the number of the users on the platform. For us at Crisis Text Line, it's the number of texters, the number of conversations we have. It might be the wait time. You know, how long are texters having to wait, and can we reduce that so we can provide a timely service? Outcomes are the difference those outputs make to the people we're trying to serve. So it's great that we have 1.5 million conversations a year in the US, but what difference does it make in the lives of an individual texter? Well, in 99% of the conversations, we're bringing people down to a place of safety, and in fewer than 1% of so we're reducing distress and we're stabilizing people, and in fewer than 1% of conversations, we're having to work with a supervisor to call in a clinical service intervention. So that's an example of an outcome at the individual level. The second thing, and so it's really important, I think, as funders, when I put my funder hat on, to think about really helping any organization we're funding with thinking about those outcomes, getting from outputs, from production to outcomes and the difference it's making. The next thing is to think about those outcomes. Are they individual level? So again, like bringing individual textures down to a cool calm, helping individual volunteers develop their skills. How do you get that? How do you like take concentric circles and think about community, right? So volunteers are turning around and helping people. There's that ripple effect of helping people in their community, whether that's family, friends, et cetera. And that's actually helping strengthen a mental health workforce through volunteering that in a system that really needs that help. The other thing is, and then like thinking about, so how do you then get the outcomes to systems change level, right? Improvements in population health. So what is our contribution? Crisis Text Line as one organization, what is its contribution to a bigger picture of suicide prevention, right? We cannot attribute our work to reductions in suicide prevention. There was a recent study last year about 988 and how suicides have gone down as a result of 988. Crisis Text Line contributed to that. We can't take all, attribution is taking all the credit, but we contributed to that as well through our service. So these are important considerations. The other thing is getting from that incremental to transformation change. I just want to add this piece in too, in terms of, as a funder, funders are thinking long-term, strategically, like really creating that long-term change in population health, right? That long-term change in well-being. Our vision is to create a more empathetic world, long-term. We get funded, not just Crisis Text Line, but in general, funders can put out funding for a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, right? What kind of transformational change can happen in 3 years? Not much. It is our job as the receiver of funds to be able to help a funder understand and the ecosystem understand how the work that we're doing now sets the stage and contributes to longer term incremental change. And so that's a really, I think, important role for us when we're seeking funding, is to be able to help tell that story. And as a funder, it's really important to think about all the different pieces we are each doing that's creating some bigger change. When I think about that, to articulate from incremental change to transformational change, I'm thinking about hypotheses. What is my hypothesis? So given our tech platform and structure, given our incredible volunteer ecosystem and the model and approach that we've established at Crisis Text Line and through our affiliate partners and such, if we can partner locally at the global scale to build and create culturally relevant text and web-based services. So keeping our approach, but building it locally, then that's culturally relevant and meaningful, then we can really unlock human connection at scale to create a more empathetic world where everyone has the ability to get the support they need in their time of need. So that's how you get from incremental to transformation.
Thank you. All right, Liz, being in the government world and now in your own organization, what trends are you seeing in the types of measurement that have been working or have been gaining traction, especially in the game industry?
Yeah, I'm going to take it back a step. So, not in the beginning, but if we think back to when games were first really hitting the scene, especially Games for Change, about 20 years ago, one of the biggest questions that a lot of us had was, why games? What is that essence, and how do I meet people where they stand in their user in the game space? I think that a lot of the metrics initially were, can I literally get eyeballs on my game? Can I get plays on my game? So with my work at the Wilson Center, there was Budget Hero, which was a predecessor to Fiscal Ship. And the big question was, can I literally get people to play a game about the federal budget? The answer was yes. We had about 2 million people play that game, 4 million people play the Fiscal Ship, which I love the fact that there's more people who've played my game than have read a budget policy brief. From a funder perspective, that was a really good pilot test. You need to understand, first of all, can you do the thing? Can you actually get people to access the game that you're talking about? But I think that I haven't seen that as evolve systematically across our field as much as I would like. When I'm looking at reviews and looking at games, a lot of people point to, look, in this review of my game on Steam, this person had a great experience. That's great. I love that. I love that it's having an impact. But I think that what we're talking about is a really systematic, rigorous way of coming up with analysis of impact. I'm seeing a couple faces in the crowd of game developers who are doing this really well, where we're seeing more and more of an intervention model potentially. That's a good way of thinking about it, especially in the government space. I'm thinking pre-2025. In the government space, there's a lot of bent towards RCT or randomized control trials, a lot of focus on using health risk models and adapting them into the game space. This means that you might have a pre-test and a post-test after using the game as an intervention in a classroom environment, for example. And we did this with our plastic pipeline game, which won here as Best in Environmental Impact a few years back. Thanks, Kristen. I'll slip you a 20 later. But one of the things that we see with that is you also have to have a really large N, a lot of people playing your game in order to demonstrate that impact. And as a game developer, for those of you who are in the audience who are in that field, you know that that's going to require a fully finished game to have a high impact, high value grain. So one of the ways that I've approached this as a game producer is to really break it down for grant foundations and other grant development projects, breaking it down into pilot studies. So the first step isn't going to be a fiscal ship. It's going to be a card game or a pen and paper prototype or a digital prototype that we can then test very intimately with a small qualitative group of iterating on the game design. I'm looking at Jonah. I think we did 5 iterations of the characters in Plastic Pipeline because people were like, I don't really like this hedgehog. I'm sorry. Can you make it less purple? And just trying to meet our target audience very robustly there. And that met, the funders for that were National Geographic Society, and that met the need for them to see, yes, okay, so you're doing a thing, you're having some impact, you're systematically analyzing it. Okay, what's the next step? The next step after that is creating more of a beta prototype that you can then implement. So as much as we chase the long story short, I'm watching my time, the long story short for that is that you can break it down into smaller pocket studies to really make sure that you are measuring or you are having the impact at a small scale before you go off into the big scale. I'm going to say personally, one thing that I wish our field embraced more was that qualitative approach and rigorous qualitative design. So with rigorous qualitative design, one of the things that you want to do is you want to have interviews. You want to have what we call triangulating the data. So you have 3 different data sources that come together, interviews, focus groups, field observation, or literally watching other people play your game, which sounds boring to some, but I find fascinating. And making sure that it is having the impact at a micro scale before you go large scale. And sorry, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you,
Yeah.
but now I have 2. Well,
Right.
first I have a comment. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that qualitative research can and should be rigorous. So often we hear people qualitative research, getting some comments that doesn't count for anything. It does.
It tells
When
the
done
story.
well, it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
important.
It gives the context and tells the story.
And it can
Yeah.
also be numbers. Quantitative isn't where all the numbers sit. It's important. But actually what I wanted to say is what I'm hearing you talk about is all these incremental steps to transformative change. So given your experience, especially on both sides, how do you help a government funder understand that what looks like little small pilots and iterations actually matters to getting to that transformative change? How do you keep them moving along with you?
So I found that the first question with some government funders, and I should say that this is not true across the board. There's some, again, I'm in the pre-2025 land of this conversation. there are some agencies that were very much had a long legacy of embracing game development as a part of their meeting their mission goals, which is the code word that a lot of government agencies work with. For those who are like dipping their toe in the water for it, one of the things that you need to connect with is the language they're used to embracing. So like with DHS, one project that I worked on for them, they were testing out intervention models and connecting that and demonstrating with others that have come before me that this was a viable way of getting behavioral change or attitudinal change or knowledge retention, depending on what they're specifically looking for. I lean a lot on research is what I'm trying to say in a very wonky way. And the other side of it is just really translating what a small study leads back up to these broader conversations. So if I can convince 5 people that plastic pollution policy, which is a mouthful, is important from a pre and a post test, even at a small scale, then it helps to build up to that larger conversation of, oh, if this game goes to a broader scale, we will probably see this impact. But the other thing that you probably know is that funders are they're often very hesitant for new ways of doing things. And you have to sort of lead them along in a pilot test in order to get that larger grant funding. So you don't have to go in for like, I would like $4 million, please. Right. You can go like, I would like $50,000 to show you ultimately what this might look like in the future. Let me paint you that picture based on examples that have come before us. And you can look here at Games for Change for examples that you can like translate for them to the specific context.
I would add to that when you're seeking that small amount of funding for your pilot, don't be afraid though to share the much bigger picture outcome.
Oh, yes, definitely.
That a successful pilot, and this is why pitching someone like the Gates Foundation with our project is though so far quite successful, is because we're asking for such a small amount of money for a potential massive upside. Because when we have a truly scalable, localized, affordable solution for mental health care, we're talking about not just the impact of these individuals who are benefiting from the program, but I was invited to speak last November at the United Nations General Assembly about this topic, because the big term there is economic capacity. So the World Bank throws money to a country that has just survived a war or some natural tragedy, and they're like, okay, now roads and hospitals and school systems, get them back up and running. And you're throwing that money to people who are operating at half their mental capacity because of trauma. So your economic capacity is right away is limited at 50%, let's say. But if you earmark a portion of those funds for mental health, then you have a higher ceiling for the economic capacity. That's our argument. But of course they come back, but mental health is not scalable. Oh, we need to talk. So being able to show that the long-term wide impact that this could have globally is really significant, especially when you're asking for $50,000.
All right, I have a couple more questions for the panel, and then we are going to turn to all of you. So start the wheels turning on reflections, questions you want to ask this group in our last 10 minutes or so. But I'll start back to Meghan. What you just said is a great segue. If you're imagining a meeting between a funder and someone who's creating a project, what are some of the questions that they should be asking each other, that funders should be asking someone like you to help make the design more suited towards transformational change?
I'd say, how are you going to measure your longitudinal change? Because it's not, our pilot is we're only looking for a 3-month pilot just to show the immediate change. We also understand we cannot state at that moment we have longitudinal change of behavior. We can do things like, and this is what I would expect from a funder, what are the measuring tools that you're proposing to use? Now, I can say what I would like to see, but the truth is it's going to be the independent university that comes in to measure. We cannot be involved in that study to that degree. Independent is really important. And I'm rigorous about this. We have researchers from Uppsala University, and Uppsala would love to get in on this. Like, no, you can't. Too many of your researchers are designing our project. We need an independent party. And also, I would prefer to have them from, say, Kyiv, to have a Ukrainian university be the ones to measure the impact, because it is a Ukrainian program. And the final product is co-designed with Ukrainian educators and therapists, so that it is truly a cultural asset. It's no longer our program. It is their program. And so we just need an independent Ukrainian university to come in and measure the impact according to their culture. So part of it is helping the funders to educate the funders that we want the most rigorous measurements in place. What we're proposing is this first 3-month trial. If everything looks good, then we'll move on to a 1 year. But that's key, is that you've got to paint the bigger picture, but you've got to be realistic about what we're trying to accomplish with your short amount of funding in a short amount of time.
Just to piggyback on that, I think that there's, from the funder side, you want to see if they have the Avengers team assembled. Do they have the game developers and the artists and the producers, et cetera, but do they have the subject matter experts to help, again, sorry, wonky, peer review the material? One of the things that I tie my games to very intimately is research. Is it research grounded? You don't have to go that way, but if you are promoting someone's voice through a game, it would probably be good to talk to people who and incorporate them as part of the game design. There was a really great panel yesterday about how you can do that, for example, in indigenous communities. The other side is, are they iteratively testing it with that target audience? Do they have access to that target audience? Are they part of the review for the game as it goes through? But more than that, is it not just the game development process? Is it also, do they have a impact design ready? Do they have somebody with a PhD or somebody who does impact research on that side? And also, honestly, do they have like a marketing plan? Do they have like an outreach mechanic, recruiting? Is it going to get to the people that you want it to get to? And if one of the answers is no, it's not that you don't have to fund them. It's also that, can you look in your network and also help them connect with maybe potentially other people that you fund to help amplify that mechanism?
I'd add one more thing, and the word that both of us have used, and I can't emphasize this enough, localized. Yes. Is your final program co-created with people of the culture it's intended to serve? And I don't mean taking your program and translating it into their language and handing it to them, okay? And this is exactly what Crisis Text Line is also doing. It's run by people who are of the culture. We come in with the initial training, we train the trainer, then we go away, and they're running the program. And it's going to adapt and refine according to their culture.
Wonderful. We naturally segued into my last question, which is about localization, and we've already heard such great examples. So, Tracy, do you have anything to add on localization, and anyone else can jump on top too?
Yeah, I'll just say for a minute to follow up what your teaser. So, last year, Crisis Text Line acquired a Kiastoy chat, which uses the same model as Crisis Text Line, but makes it available via WhatsApp in Spanish globally, so covering 21 countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, Spain. And Kiastoy originally came to Crisis Text Line in the early 2022 or 23, I'm looking at my colleagues, something like that, and said, we really want to bring this to Latin America. Can we use your model? And they went through our training, they developed for themselves, and then over time, realized they came back to us and said, let's partner together so you can help us scale more. So now we've got a pretty well-established model, 12 years in the making, Crisis Text Line US base, and now we're merging with a Kiastoy chat. We can't just take our US base, and one of the first jobs was to help them strengthen their training and update their training. and then help them move towards expanding in terms of reaching young people and becoming 24/7 available. We can't just take our training and be like, here's the U.S. training translated to Spanish. What was critically important was to adapt the training to be culturally relevant, culturally appropriate, and also like culturally policy relevant. So in the US, we have rules about mandatory reporting. Those are different across every single Spanish-speaking country, and we had to do the research to find out mandatory reporting rules, as an example. So in program development, that localization is important. In addition, how we picture, we're trying to go for global scale, right? So everyone is supported anywhere all the time in their language. And at the same time, our conversations end with our volunteers offering local resources for further support. So we have to work on the ground locally to find what are the resources in each of these different countries to support those people in crisis. Where are they going to go if their crisis continues? So we're working in that way locally. Now, I got a little bit off tangent there. What I want to also add is from an impact perspective. So to your point, it's really important to have evaluation done locally, so it's also culturally relevant evaluation. It's important to bring in the mental health field. People talk, and like social sciences, a lot like lived experience, which is what you're talking about too, beneficiaries, like bringing them in to help with the impact evaluation and create equitable evaluation approaches that really are framed with questions that matter to the community. Funders often, our experience is funders want specific things that help them report to their board, right, and their decision makers. And so leading impact evaluation of crisis text line, I find every funder has a different set of things they want us to report on. We're trying to get to a place, and I appreciate that. That's really important. We fully support reporting on the metrics for Peru versus Argentina versus the US. Fine, we're happy to do that. And we're trying to help collaboratively with funders move them towards a more standardized way of thinking about our impact, because we're going to get to transformational change if we can be a little more standardized in how we think about impact. So it's like this flexibility of localized metrics along with standardized metrics that we kind of play in the space of.
Can I actually ask you, if you had your dream of standardized metrics, what's one thing that you wish would be incorporated like across the board?
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I think it's those systems change outcomes that are really hard to get at, right? There's this, if you look it up, and I'm more interested in hearing from you than hearing me, but there is this concept in systems change around spheres of influence. So where you have direct control, where you have direct influence, where you have larger influence and aspirational influence, like really getting NGOs, getting organizations, and getting funders to be thinking in that systems way about the collective change we're trying to create and measuring that. That's my dream.
Yeah,
It's a good dream.
Yeah, I would also add that when you have as we were talking about, a localized measuring agency, the research agency, like a local research, like Kiev University for the Ukrainian project, they already know how to do all of the government approvals. Like we have something called IRB, especially when working with children. That's pretty rigorous for us to go through in order to work with children and be able to run a study on it, because it has to be anonymized data and how that data is stored. We just went through this with adults for an EU-funded project called LARPocracy. It's the largest LARP-funded project in the world. But my goodness, storing the data, it had to be cloud-based. At no moment could you download that and put that onto your computer. So you had to use tools that were specifically for cloud-based measurements. So there's a lot to consider that those universities have already gone through and already know how to work with. And one more thing was, I love the story that Crisis Text Line has about their volunteers having an impact on their local community, where you don't necessarily see when they are helping people directly in their community. As somebody who volunteers in hospice, I do this, I serve this function in my community. People are constantly reaching out to me. So the hospice training that I received is impacting my entire community, because I'm the person who they call when a loved one is in the process of dying. So that kind of, I like to call it like a viral cure. And they're doing the same thing in these anecdotal and informal studies with live action role playing for people coming off the front in Ukraine, for adults, where when they learn how to what kind of language to use to put, because these are people who don't have language for how to speak their feelings. And when their character learns this language, they can turn around and utilize it with their community. So you have that viral change where now an entire community is beginning to learn the language of mental health.
I'm so sorry. I know Risa's going to get the stick on me, but I want to pin on something that you mentioned, which is IRB, which is a point of strife for many people developing games outside of academia, but also I think an important part of actually developing a game ethically. One of the reasons why we have IRB in the United States is because there's a lot of evidence that if you don't have it, people do not great things with people who are in disenfranchised communities. So if you see it as a grant agency, it's important, I think, for you to ask for that sort of a rigorous test. If you are a game developer, I am sorry that I'm very much championing that, but there are independent IRB agencies out there, and it's just an incredibly important part for you to also think through the steps in your process and to really consider what is it that I'm putting together and how is this going to impact people.
I'm going to plus one that for 30 seconds, just to say Crisis Text Line as a private nonprofit, we do have an IRB. We're now working with 2 IRBs, one for any research and evaluation we do in our US-based service, and another one for global services. Once you go through training and learn how to do the documentation you need to, it's actually very doable. It's not, it sounds scary, but it's not, and it really adds rigor to the work you're doing, and funders will be very interested. We probably need to turn to
Yes, that
questions
is a
now.
great practical tool, though, so I'm glad we got there. Tatiana, I forgot to ask, do we have access to a mic to go around the audience, or should we just have people really project?
Oh, good.
Incredible. Thank you so much. All right, so who would like to add a question for the panel, a reflection? All right, wonderful.
Hi. Sorry, you're singing my song. I work at the Museum of Science, Boston.
Oh, wonderful.
I was
Boston,
just there
Boston.
recently.
Hi. Yeah, we need to
Fantastic
chat. Okay, sorry. I'm going to try and cut it down. So I think one of the big challenges that I find, to give a little context, our president has set us the big, hairy, audacious goal to reach 1 billion, with a B, people annually by 2030 across digital channels alone. Yes, that's the exhale I take every day. And so we have an in-house R&E team. We are moving at such a pace that I am finding it, and this is I have a personal investment in this, getting from localization to scalability, and how to bring a funder with you from that one step to the other, or rather to show them the localization is a crucial part before the scalability can happen if we want to make real impact rather than just, big numbers, truthfully.
So you're singing my song there because I am always looking at transformation and transformative impact, which has to start at small scale. So is there a way someone has the ear of the president to be able to explain that big reach numbers do not equate impact? And if I would go back to the mission of your museum and look at it and show and remind him, what is our goal? Is our goal to just reach a lot of people, or is our goal to truly make a change? And for a lot of museums, it is actually to have an impact, to help remind them that you have to go through stages in order to create true impact. You cannot measure impact by simply contact points. That's just a number. That is an output and not an outcome. So, yeah.
But if I hear you right, is the question the reverse? Like, you have funders that are embedded in that local environment and you're trying to bring them along to, like, no, 1 billion views is great.
Yeah, sorry, this is like a hyper-specific example. You don't have to solve this for me. But yeah, there's a very interesting push-pull that I've noticed with funders, right? There's the hyper-local funders that are more interested in very localized impact. And then there's the board that we are actually responsible to, accountable to, and the trustees who want to see scalable impact. And so there's this we're in a pedagogical moment right now, from old school exhibit design to digital. And I feel like the fourth horseman of the apocalypse sometimes. I make that joke and it's not always well received. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm taking up too much time.
Happy to chat later after, but I think one of the things that I would say for a local funder is you're amplifying your community. You're bringing it up and putting like a magnifying glass on your community.
I think we have time for one more question. If there's, we got two in the front. Maybe we'll take both and we'll try to answer them together.
Actually, I believe we have time for more. What time is it? Because we have till noon.
I thought we wanted to respect the 45 minutes. Well, we'll try to pause at the 45-minute mark for anybody who needs a break before your next one, and then we'll stick around for anyone who wants to keep chatting.
I know we were talking about funding from grants and NGO perspectives, but from corporate, with ESG, the S part of ESG, or even EAP models, have you gotten funding and using games for employees, or is corporate too far gone?
Ooh, great question. Let's take our other question and then we'll respond to both. I think it was up here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my question is about the great game that you're designing, Meghan, and I know that an independent organization is measuring it, and you don't know exactly how they're going to, but I assume you've looked at some of the tools that they might use to measure it, and I'm wondering how that's affected your design to create those specific outcomes to those measurements.
Yeah, so we want to touch on corporate employees and then also on specific measurement vehicles.
Okay, so for specific measurements, my hope is that we can collaborate with them to find out what it is they want to measure and how they want to measure it, give suggestions on what we've had success with in using in the past. But absolutely, we want to make sure that we're designing our experience to make sure that what they're seeking to measure is available to measure. Because a lot of it is going to be based upon surveys that are filled out, but also observations. So we're looking not just at what the self-reported data is from the participants, but also from the facilitators, what they're observing in the participants. Are they observing change of behavior inside of the game environment over the span of the study? And then also from the therapist, because 20 of the facilitators report to a therapist. So the therapist should be reporting as well. And these are things that we would like to see happen. Does the therapist feel like the facilitators are utilizing me correctly? They seem to be presenting problems to me that are reasonable and not over the scope. We have an escalation path. If a child is found to have more trauma than is appropriate for the type of intervention, that they have an escalation path to actual more therapy help than what we're doing. So our plan is to present the full system of what we're going to have in place, and then ask them, what are you planning to measure and how, so that we can make sure you're able to get the data that you need. And then by being aware of how they're collecting that data, we can make sure that the overall design is suitable for that.
I have a quick thought on the corporate question, if I can jump in. And actually, our partners here are in the room. If anyone was in our panel yesterday, Tracy was in the panel with our colleague Patricia from Discord. Was an example we're really proud of a partnership between our nonprofit Crisis Text Line and Discord to co-create a training experience that was also adapted into a playable game to help people in the Discord community learn how to convey empathy digitally, by text, by other digital media. And that's available to anyone to play. If you want to try it and see it for yourself, we can get you the QR code to check that out as an example of how we can bring some of these ideas into corporate spaces.
I would just piggyback on that and say corporate isn't too far gone. As you said, corporate is made up of people, and people in these organizations care very deeply about a range of issues, whether that's the environment, you can see through Play for the Planet, or whether it's for a large like Civility Online. Roblox is here robustly on that front. I would say that one of the ways to really tap into that space is to really think through what corporate cares about, and it's not necessarily the ROI of like amplifying revenue. They care about their people generally, and they also care about the communities that they're building. So that's a couple of things.
I think we should wrap to make sure the other panel can get up. Thank you everyone so much. We will stick around. We would love to chat with you. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for our fantastic speakers. And as they say, the eye around, please, if you still have some questions you would like to connect, please, they're available to approach. Give them, once again, a warm round of applause. Thank you so much, ladies.